Hello everybody, good day today. Saturday afternoon here in Minneapolis. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Some folks know me as DJ Dan. We're here to talk jazz, and today we're going to talk about the Argo label out of Chicago. It's a label that is founded by Chess Records, which is a blues record out of Chicago, record label out of Chicago, founded by Phil and Leonard Chess. They've been around for a while doing black blues music in Chicago, some rhythm and blues, and they decided to add the jazz imprint Argo. And Argo's around for about 10 years before there was a lawsuit with a British label in the UK that does a lot of spoken word and stuff. It was also named Argo, so they switched the name to Cadet. And by 65, the label has shifted some. But Argo's a great label, and I'm going to illustrate for you in many ways how special they are. Of course, being in Chicago, there's a lot of African Americans available for them to record, probably rather untapped in some ways. A lot of greats hail from the area, including Cannonball Adderley. They have a fairly incredible roster of early records here in this first 50 records I'm going to show you. It's going to cover most of the late 50s. Their release dates seem to be kind of offset. There's some strange sequence to the releases at times. But first and foremost, Argo should be known for their pianist. They had two mainstays that were at the label for decades and really set a high standard for Chicago piano jazz. One of the great ones, fantastic Barry Harris. His first record came out on Argo. Then Billy Taylor made a record here. This is probably late 1959. Nice little record. But then the two that are the mainstays here, of course, are Ahmad Jamal, that's an easy record to find. Great stuff. Put it on, enjoy it. And then Ramsey Lewis. And this will bring me into my next little part here on Argo. There was this great Chicago personality DJ named Daddy-O Daly, and he became one of the hep cats and the definition of that in a lot of ways. The term Daddy-O, there was a movie that stole his name. There was a lawsuit about that. He was one of the first DJs in Chicago to bring bebop and modern jazz to the radio waves over swing music, and it was a pretty big departure, and he became a pretty influential figure in a lot of what was happening in Chicago. And he produced 4 records here for Argo called the Daddy-O Presents. And this Ramsey Lewis, Gentleman of Jazz, great stuff. Daddy-O Presents #1. This Paul Gonsalves record. One of the tricks about Argo is they haven't all been reissued. Japan, Germany, nowhere. So some of these records can get really expensive just due to limited availability alone. This MJT3 with Walter Perkins is great stuff. Nice modern jazz. And last of all, this one was the last one I found. The Clark Terry Out on a Limb record. Never been reissued anywhere in the world. And so to find that record, it's going to set you back for that reason alone every time. All 4 are great records. Scott Baldwin was talking to me about the Daddy-O Presents, and I'd noticed them but didn't know much about it, so I did some reading on it. And it's a pretty fascinating character in the Black American novel that jazz is, and he had a lot of pull in the Midwest and probably nationally. Cannonball Adderley does that song on something else, Daddy-O, and so you can see he's a figure that's to be known and recognized. Argo has a pretty solid art department. Like, that's a beautiful album cover. Another great album cover. But there's also some really big names here on Argo. They have probably the deep enough pockets, being the Chess Brothers, to bring in some decent names. They don't have the best reputation, the Chess Brothers, of how they treated their black artists, which is one of the negatives about Argo. Is they're none of the people who really recorded for them have a good word to say about them. And it's the story of America, and the Jews had it tough. And most of these Jew producer label runners seem to have some degree of empathy for the black experience and thus there was this chemistry of symmetry there where they kind of recognized that this was going to be how it was. And so we had to make music to feed that need, and they saw a business opportunity as well, because no one on the major white labels wanted to touch black music that was anything close to black music. You know, if we were going to do anything that was black, it was going to be as whitewashed as possible. And so to make black music for black people, it shouldn't have been a novel thing, but in some ways it is, and in some ways it was a risky thing. So the Chess brothers may not have been the best reputation, but they still documented some of the most important records of the 20th century, from the Muddy Waters and the Sonny Boy Williamsons and the John Lee Hooker, all that Chess jazz blues stuff, to this incredible discography of Argo. There's about 150 titles in the Argo sequence before it switches over to Cadet, and that takes you to about 1965. So they release stuff fairly consistently. Here's a rundown of some of the bigger names. James Moody has quite a few albums on Argo. He's there for quite a long time. The Chicago scene record took a long time to find with Sandy Mossy. It's also got Irish Roman, Eddie Baker, real cooking modern Chicago jazz. Zut Sims, tough record to find. Well, one off you did here on Argo. Johnny Griffin, another great Chicago player. This is his debut on Chicago music label, of course. Max Roach, another great Chicago guy. And of course, him and Clifford Brown are across town at Emercy Mercury, making some of the most important records of the late 50s. We're going to cover them next. Sonny Stitt is at the label a few different times and records probably 5 records, maybe 6 records. This Vito Price record, great shot of the Loop, Chicago with the buses there, probably Michigan Avenue. It's got Lou Levy, Max Bennett, Gus Johnson, Freddie Green, so some really great East Coast players there with them. Yusef Lateef has a very early session here. This is mixed in their summer with all the Savoy records. This one pops in 1958 or so. Yusef made a lot of records. And of course, the Fiery Red Rodney, one of the great trumpet players that no one talks about. This guy could play fast tempos like few guys, you know. He really had a great strong embouchure and straight tense tone that could really emulate every sound with full body. And Rez Rodney's kind of an underrated guy that the older cats seem to know, the younger cats don't give a shit about. This record here and his other one on Contemporary, I just listened to the other day. It's great stuff, man. So Argo, all in all, is an album label that's really worth collecting. There's 150 titles. I have most of them. I'll get to a part 2 where we cover the 60s part of my next round. But they're often in record stores for $5 to $15. And just because you don't recognize the name on the record doesn't mean you don't buy it. I've found in almost all these labels that I've covered so far that the quality of musicianship across the board is always pretty outstanding. And even the names you don't know, and even the names that don't have a great legacy, are, you know, people are gonna be like, oh, I'm so glad, jealous you got that. You didn't get into a recording studio in the late 50s without having some serious ability. You didn't get to waste tape to track you unless you could really play. So just because someone wasn't really discovered or really successful, they're almost always still really outstanding musicians. It's not like today where any jerk-off can get into a booth, make some stupid rhymes, sample a phone, and talk about, yeah, I'm a musician. In those days, you had to be able to play, you had to be able to say something. If someone didn't feel you somewhere along the line, you weren't getting into a studio. You weren't getting wax pressed. To get vinyl pressed, you had to be a player. And so that's what I'm finding with all these major tier, you know, even though they're regional labels, they're still important labels in the jazz canon. And if you stumble on something from any one of these labels that I've talked about, it's going to be good playing. And then the first thing you got to look at, okay, is it a black artist or is it a white artist? And that's going to tell you something about where they're coming from, what they're emoting, how they're expressing, what their experience and their environment is. See what I'm saying? That's the whole, we always get back to that. Is what is my experience, what is my environment, what's my personality, how am I going to handle that experience with that environment and express that through my horn this very moment, this instant. And that's the key ingredient to jazz. It's that magic. What am I feeling? And can you feel what I'm feeling? Can you feel where I'm coming from? I might be playing a happy melody, but today I'm kind of sad. Can you feel that tension? Can you feel that burn coming out of me? And I think the great players are the ones that can really get that across. And that isn't necessarily even always about virtuosity. That's where a guy feel comes in. And a guy like Stanley Turrentine can say more in this relaxed, slow feeling than some guys could cram into 1,000 notes. So it's feel, feel, feel. Open your heart. Listen to where a cat's coming from and what he's probably got to say. And that takes some empathy on your part. It takes some willingness to go, what's this guy's life like? And then when I recognize that jazz is improvisation, but I'm improvising based off my emotional experience, how can they not be talking about that experience? How can they not be releasing that? And like I said, it's not that hard to really get into a player. You look at 5 photos of a guy's face, you can kind of tell what his personality is. It's not that hard to see how much less intense a guy Kang Mobley was than Miles Davis. And I know who I'd rather be stuck in an elevator with. See what I'm saying? It's not that hard to feel personality, and then it's not that hard to find a little bit of the history to understand that guy's experience, and then obviously the environment that is Black America. So I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Keep empathy and heart and peace together in your mind, because we need to reach out and touch each other. We need to get that place where we put aside those divisions. It seems so simple and so cliche, but our history is one. We are really one people, one race, and our human broadness should be as broad as the photos of our planet from space. We should see ourselves as humanity. We should have empathy for more than just my group. And that's where so many of us get stuck. We're just like, oh yeah, I care about me and my people, my clan, my family, my color, my religion, my race, my nation. But as long as you're excluding most of the rest of the world, you're going to lack and look concerned of what happens to the rest of the world. And that's a problem. And the elite use that lack of concern for the rest of the world to keep you from questioning their agenda at all times. Jazz says, you know what? You my brother, you my sister, come on in, let's talk about all this. I gotta run. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk soon. Emerson's coming at you next. Peace.